Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to Open Your Eyes to the Universe. I'm Gabrielle Martin, and it's a pleasure to have you with us again for another episode. If you're joining for the first time, a very warm welcome, and let me tell you that Open Your Eyes to the Universe is a series of contemporary talks, conversations, open-eyed meditations, and interviews with people who inspire and uplift others just by sharing their wisdom, their insights, and experiences. Now, you'll probably remember that last month on Youniverse, we were in conversation with Chrissy Mahoney and Niall Phoenix, two very experienced mediators and equally experienced meditators, and they were discussing conflict solutions. They had a lot to share with us and gave us quite a few tips. So if you've missed that episode, Jan will put it in the chat box for you so you can catch up with it at your leisure. She'll just pop that link into the chat box. Now, tonight we are with writer, actor, and artist Barbara Bossert Ramsay. Barbara's work encompasses areas as diverse as television drama, syndicated newspaper columns, children's books, poetry and songs, as well as stage plays and musicals, and most important to her, writings on matters of the spirit. She's the writer of the highly acclaimed play, The Accidental Mystic, which had extended seasons in Australia, London, New York, and India. And as I recall, it's staged in the main cities of New Zealand as well. Her children's book, Finding the Magic, became and continues to be a focal point for human development programs. Barbara has been a spiritual student all her life and has made more than 30 journeys to the East in her own search. What she has found forms the basis of much of her writing. Her writings on the journey of the soul can be found in many diverse places in the world. A light and sound show near the Aztec ruins in Mexico talks about spiritual power. And in India, on the top of Mount Abu, in a spiritual art gallery, is the story of the cycle of time. Her writings in the Peace Pavilion, built as part of the 2000 Olympics here in Sydney, spoke of the peace to be found within, and near the Somnath temple in the west of India, another light and sound show tells the humanity's link with the divine. Her book, Tao of the Traveller, The 7 Keys of Enlightenment, has become an integral part of peace and higher consciousness programs in many countries, and is now an award-winning film. The knowledge contained in Tao of the Traveller has been her doorway to the divine. So as you can see, a very successful career. And her life focus changed when she found spiritual answers she didn't even know that she was looking for. Now, that's a very engaging way to stumble upon enlightenment, isn't it? In her words, and something that I think many of you listening will resonate with, Barbara shares that being able to express my spiritual journey in my writing and performing is a great privilege. The times when the writing seems to come from somewhere outside of me, when something almost demands to be written, are times of very deep happiness. And this is when I feel that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. So tonight, we're not following our usual format. Instead, we're going on a journey together with a story written by Barbara called Turnings, the Story of Time. It'll take us on a journey that reawakens memories we perhaps didn't even know that we had. It's enhanced by a soundscape created by some of the best musicians in Australia, with David Jones in the composer's seat. So Turnings is a journey that carries you, your mind and heart, through the world as it was, as it is, and as it will be. So get ready to travel. No COVID restrictions, no passport needed, no bags to pack. You can take this journey in the comfort of your armchair. But first of all, let's meet Barbara. Barbara, it's divine to have you with us tonight. Thanks for joining us on Open Your Eyes to the Universe.
Well, thank you, Gabriel. I love the privilege. It's quite a privilege to do this.
Look, we're just delighted, and it's so lovely to be able to share your work with so many listeners and viewers that are very keen to get acquainted with it. And what a remarkable life. You've lived your whole life as an artist. You know, you're a singer, you're an actor, a pianist, a writer of stage, screen, poetry, novels, even a syndicated newspaper column. And you've also written and produced your own dinner theatre. So just going back, what's your earliest memory of being a creative?
Oh, my earliest memory would be when I was 4 years old and my parents started me in dancing school because I was born with flat feet and they thought that was going to be a cure. But so much, it was so much fun because when you're a little kid, being able to put on makeup and dress up and go onto a stage and do things with other kids and have a whole audience clapping and shouting bravo because they were all our parents, of course. But that was absolutely wonderful. And that transitioned, the dancing school transitioned the way things do in life, even when we don't know it at the time, because I stayed in that dancing school until I was a teenager. And then it sort of morphed into the Connecticut Ballet Company. And so I was a member of a ballet company then. And there were males as well, because we had a dance pas de deux, etc. And then later, when I went to Southern Connecticut University, it was in New Haven, Connecticut, and I discovered that Yale was only 15 minutes away, and the Yale Drama School was one of the best drama schools in America. So you couldn't get me away. I didn't know how to do it, but one of the boys that I had danced with at the Connecticut Ballet actually went to Yale, found out I was there, rang me and said to come and have an audition to see, because Yale then was not a co-ed school, it was all male. So whenever they did a production, the female parts had to come from outside. So I went and auditioned and I got in, and the first show I did there was Babes in Arms, which is a little musical. You might remember it because there was a movie of it with Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney, but that was quite different. And I didn't play Mickey Rooney, I played Judy Garland. But that was wonderful because I spent absolutely no time at the college I'd enlisted in. I spent all of my time at Yale Drama School doing productions there. And that led me in an odd way, that ended up leading me to New York. Nikos Sakaropoulos, who was the head of the drama school, recommended me to a director of a wonderful summer stock company. Now, in Australia, you don't have summer stock, but in America, summer stock is kind of it's a tradition. And you do, in 2 months, you do 4 plays. So you really learn very fast because you're rehearsing one show while you're doing another at night. You're rehearsing one in the daytime, a new one, and performing another one at night. So I did that. And then the director of that was opening his first off-Broadway show, a 2-hander, and asked me if I would be in it without audition or anything, because he'd seen me in all of these other things. And that got me to New York because that was off-Broadway. So it all happened because of having flat feet and starting dancing school. And it was just wonderful because after the first off-Broadway show, I did a bunch of others, Little Mary Sunshine, The Fantastics, All in Love, which was a musical version of Sheridan's The Rivals. That was quite something. But of course, what I wanted to do was be on Broadway. I mean, it was hard not to want that. And all of the things that had happened without an agent. So I didn't have an agent. And if you didn't have an agent in New York then, you couldn't get an audition at a particular time. You had to go to what was called an open call. And that was advertised in Variety, which was the theatrical newspaper. And millions of people would show up clutching their music. And when I went to the first audition, which was for Oliver, there must have been 50 people stretching around the block, standing there holding their music, waiting to get to the stage door. And when you got up to the stage door and it was your turn, they let you in and they let you sing the last 8 bars of your music. And then they either said, thank you, which meant get out, or thank you, that was lovely, and go and sit in the house. So you'd go sit out in the audience and wait. So you went through all those 50 people, and then it would get down to maybe 20 people. And they would call you up from the audience. And this time you could actually give your music to the pianist and actually sing your song. And again, they would either say, thank you, goodbye, or please wait in the audience. So we would do that again. And the next time you came up, there would be the choreographer, and he would line you up in maybe 2 rows of 10 people each. And do a little dance, and you'd have to copy it immediately. And if you couldn't copy it immediately, you'd get, thank you. So I passed that one. And then if you passed that one, they would invite you back and give you the script. And then you could read the script opposite the director. And then you either got in or you didn't. And luckily, and somehow, I got into Oliver. So that was my first Broadway show. But that's what it was like then. If you didn't have an agent, it was just really terrifying. Oh my goodness. And once I'd done that, sorry.
I'm just thinking the synchronicity of it, just how the doors opened and you were able to go through them. It's remarkable, isn't it?
It was really wonderful.
Yeah.
And after that, the musical director of Oliver, Donald Pippin, he was leaving to do a new Broadway show called 110 of the Shade, a musical version of The Rainmaker. And he asked me if I would come with him to the new show. So then I got my second Broadway show. And after that, there was a musical. There was Ben Franklin in Paris with Robert Preston, a Music Man, and all kinds of other ones, because it was what you could do. But it was also, if you knew somebody that liked your work, they would kind of carry you, with them. So, and I lived in New York then, and luckily I had an aunt that lived in New York, and I was able to stay with her. She didn't approve of what I was doing. She thought I should go back to Southern Connecticut College. She didn't think the theater was a good place for a girl.
And I'm going to pause here and tell a little story, which is, I never knew Barbara as a writer initially. And I'm going to just mention an experience I had when I was up in, I was in Mount Abu in Rajasthan in India, and at the headquarters of the Brahma Kumaris. And we were, periodically and during the evening, we would have international cultural programs. And I went up to the main auditorium and I sort of settled into the armchair there. And the stage was bare, just dimly lit. And I started to settle into a little bit of a meditation. The auditorium was full. And as I was settling into a meditation, I heard the most angelic music. It was just, it totally mesmerized me. And I felt it was just pulling me more and more into a deeper meditation. And, that expression that the heavens opened, it felt very much like the heavens had opened and this angel was singing the most divine music. And after a while, it went on for quite a, how it is, it sort of time stands still a little bit and you go deeply into the experience. But as I was coming out of it, I really wanted to know what CD that was. It had really moved me very deeply. And so I went backstage and to ask the guy operating the sound booth what CD he was playing. And I got back there and there actually was no one in the sound booth at all. And the stage was empty. But what I noted was that in between the black big veils and the sides and the wings of the stage, I saw the profile of Barbara. And she was singing her heart out. And that's how I met Barbara, and the most angelic voice. And to this day, I don't have a recording of her singing at all, but I do have the memory of it, and it touched me deeply. So thank you for that, Barbara.
Thank you. That's lovely.
Barbara's talent as a singer is immense, and equally her talent, her written words, and Barbara, there's been a lot of years between then and now, isn't there? In the past few decades, you've directed your immense talent to writing and performing pieces with a more mystical and transcendental nature. And one of the latest projects is Turnings, the piece that we've gathered together here this evening to listen to tonight. Yeah. Maybe share with us how you were inspired to write it.
Well, actually, it began in India. And I was actually driving in a car up that mountain, going to Madhuban, the headquarters of the Brahma Kumaris. And as I was traveling up, things kept popping into my mind, just thoughts and feelings, and quite strongly. And I'd always been interested in cyclic time, even before Raj Yoga, because ancient cultures had believed that time was cyclic, and there were religions and philosophies, and even the Emperor of Rome. I remember learning in high school that the Emperor of Rome, Marcus Aurelius, in the ancient days had believed that time was cyclic. So these ideas kept coming more strongly as we were traveling up the mountain. And as soon as I got there and was given a room, before I even started to unpack, I started to scribble my thoughts on paper. And that went on for quite a while. And a few days later, I had written Turnings. It was like it was given to me, handed to me. Now, I knew this wasn't going to be a book or an article because it wasn't written like that. So I thought really it had to be something I would read out as a performance piece because I couldn't think of what else to do with it. I did the first version in the Om Shanti Retreat Center outside of Delhi. That was the first time I ever did it. It was during a retreat, and there were quite a few people there. I simply stood in front of a microphone and read it. But while I was reading it, a brother named Mauricio, a wonderful musician from Chile, played music to accompany the reading. And I wasn't expecting that. And it was just wonderful. And the next time I did it was actually on stage in the main ashram in Madhuban, the main stage that you were talking about before. David Kalofsky, who lived there year round and played many instruments, came on while I was reading it and spread his instruments on the ground cloth on the stage and played during the reading. He would just listen to me talking, and then he would pick up an instrument and play it, or he'd walk over to another one and play it. And he finished with a conch shell sound that he would blow, really haunting sound. So music accompanying it worked very well. But those of you who are hearing Turnings tonight will have more than just music. When David Jones and I started working on it together, it became something much more than just music to accompany a script. David, as many of you know, is a brilliant musician and one of the most innovative percussionists in the world. He is a virtuoso and he takes percussion to a whole new level. He is, in a word, brilliant. David gathered 12 of the best musicians that he knew, and they were each given studio time. I didn't read Turnings to them. They were simply given scenarios. David would give them possibilities to play to. He would ask them to play to emotions and feelings. For instance, one might be told to imagine what the world would be like if it were perfect, happy, safe, with no pain for anyone. Then he would be, that musician would be given time in the studio to improvise music, to show what that would feel like, to be like. Another might be asked what he thought it would be like if the world were actually ending, the way people thought it would in 2000, and to improvise to that. They came into the studio, these musicians, in twos and sometimes threes, as well as singly, and they brought with them their favorite instruments. Now, if you know musos, you know that if something rings or bangs or reverberates or strums or clicks or hisses, if it sounds like a bell or a gong or a whistle, they'll find it and buy it or make it, but they'll play it. These musos brought with them the most wonderful instruments from all corners of the world. Many I knew, many I didn't, but they used all kinds of instruments to improvise to the possibilities that David gave them. David loved it when two or three, after improvising for some time, would fall silent as though they were finished. And then one of them would start again with one note and the other would join and there would be more music. We even had, at the very end, when we thought we had all the music, David came in and said, we have one more musician. And I said, well, where from? And he said, he's a street musician. David had heard it busking on the street and he had a quality that seemed right. So David told him about the project and asked if he'd like to come and record something. He played the accordion and he loved the chance, this busker, and David gave him $100, which the busker said was more than he'd made busking in a week. He was really, really happy to come on board. And of course, the conch shell was recorded on Mount Abu by David Kalofsky. Carmen Warrington added magical vocal sounds. David then took this massive amount of music and sounds and he edited and sculpted and listened to the narration over and over, finding exactly the right sounds and music for the right places. Sometimes he would use only a few seconds of a particular sound. After he'd done that, I recorded the piece and we spent time in the studio marrying and blending music and sound with narration. So it's no longer music accompanying words. Thanks to David, it's a kind of soundscape. And the soundscape tells the story just as much as the words do. So I think we might be ready to go. I'll ask you all to close your eyes while you listen so your mind can travel where it wants to go. And if while you're listening, scenes or visions or memories fall into your mind, welcome them. Let them accompany you through time. So, enjoy the journey. Om Shanti.
There is ancient knowledge about time and its shape, a knowledge that gives time no beginning and no end, but eternity, in a cycle that carries the earth and the people on it through age after age. And though there is no beginning as we know it, there is a time in this cycle of perfection, a time of purity of matter and the souls who travel through it. With entropy and the passage of time, matter becomes less and less perfect. Souls, too, are under the thrall of time, as well as the results of their own actions. In truth, there is no place to start this story, because there is no beginning. So let us just dive straight into time, wherever that may be. And in front of them was one who went a little ahead. One whose light held a promise almost remembered. He went first, and understanding finally broke the hold of fear. And the people began to travel, knowing at last that they were going home. Weightless, bodiless, free of the world, free of each other, they flew. And then, in either an eye's twinkle or an eternity, home. Home. In this place of red gold light, where length divided by time is fixed, where velocity cannot be measured, and the laws of physics hang balanced. They came to rest, the souls. Infinitesimal now, without motion, without thought, an energy of unseen light. Each one holding the absolute, the total of every one of its own stories, from beginning to beginning. They, we, you, suspended, close to that eternal light that touches all consciousness, invisibly eternal. The one who has no stories in time, the one who is, always and always. And there we rest, all near, but separate. And we will never know just how this happens until it does. And then it won't matter. But we will know then, only to forget when we want to know another time in time. But there, the souls who play their parts in the world's story rewound again to the beginning of their beginning, waiting where time slips between the spaces until the birth of the world begins anew. Endless cycles, from perfection through time, until once again the world falls, and then perfection, to re-happen evermore, again and yet again. But for some kind of time in this place, we are consciousness alone. And when again begins anew, we move once more without motion, weightless, dimension through dimension. Time folds us until we arrive in matter again. And so it continues. We flicker again into new bodies, forgetting almost everything, even as we go. And the world is young, and you and I and they are young with it. As our eyes open on life, never has such beauty been seen. The beauty that was in that time when the world was young, in that time before the people first laid stone on stone to raise an altar. The thoughts of the people were easy then, like crystal, and rang gently, like a speaking breeze. And I, like the others, remembered nothing. But the nothing was never empty. There was a glimpse of a moment hardly there, just before, when I remembered the light and the love and eternity that it carried, and the promise. But I remembered barely, and it was quickly gone. Slowly, I began to know myself. I met myself as more than energy, without form. For two beings were there who stood tall and face to face. No sight was mine yet, but I could feel them there, face to face. And the power of their eyes meeting brought my world into existence. Their hands were almost touching, as palm to palm they stood, close, so close. Palm to palm and eyes to eyes they stood, and I was home. I was never to know exactly how it happened, but I too, when I was grown, stood with another, heart to heart, and eyes to eyes, and palm to palm, with a deep, unerring love, until our child was there. And life in this time was right. The water we drank from the clear ponds tasted of flowers, and when we talked together, there were spaces in between the words. And the words sounded like music. Sometimes a bird would brush by gently, and, like a signal, sleep would come. Questions had not been discovered yet, so talking was very little. But our eyes would touch, and understanding happened as naturally and as unthought as a breath. There was no word for love. Why name what we did not need to seek? And there was no word for sorrow. Why name what did not exist? There were trees of great beauty, and these came in twos, like most of life there. And each pair of trees grew different fruit than the other pairs. Though the fruit was always different, every tree reached up in the same way. The branches low to the ground grew what was good and nourishing for the animals. Gentle all, they would gather in soft groups, feeding at the bottom of the trees. The middle branches of every tree held all the fruits that we loved. They were so wonderful that we never tired of them, and we never ate without smiling. Then there were the topmost branches, the ones that reached into the air. Here, the birds would gather, all kinds and sizes, feeding on the things that made them fly with joy. You could feel their joy and hear it in their song. A music never quite the same in any other time. But this only was the first part of our story. Their story. Your story. If there ever was a beginning. For time slipped just a little. So little that no one heard it slip. Everyone slept that night like every other night, and that slip made an almost unheard noise, like the tiniest of bells. In the morning light, you, sat by the river. The clothes you wore were silk made from flowers. No small worms died there suddenly, and so the silk came from flowers, woven from petals that dropped from the trees. And the colors were such that no one had ever seen the like before. The colors of the underneath of a bird's tongue, and the silver of a raindrop just about to fall, and the gold and red, seen only when you close your eyes in the sun. They spoke softly, and not often, but in time, the talk turned to the flowers. They laughed with delight as they noticed the colors of the petals that had clothed them all. They had never noticed before. They spoke with gentle joy of the colors they liked best, the ones they would favor the next time. It was a joyful exchange, and there was something new to think about. Thinking about beauty was fun. That morning by the river made almost no difference. At least none anyone could see, even if they were to look. But there had been an addition to the life they led. It went by the name of preference. It was fun and new, and they began to choose the color of the petals for their garments. In time, if you were to ask, they would be able to tell you their favorite color. It was part of them now, part of how they saw themselves. In the months that followed, other things came and sat in their minds, things that had never needed thinking about before. Life was good, more interesting, they thought, though they weren't sure exactly what that meant. The community they lived in was bigger now. There had been 2 hamlets as long as they could remember, but now there were more. Sometimes, when they went to visit, there were even people they didn't know. They chose pretty colors to wear when they visited. They had never thought of doing that before. They liked it. Life now held a barely perceptible difference, like a tinge on white, that some of them recognized as somehow different than the happiness that had been theirs. One mentioned it to another, just in passing. "Maybe," said the other. "It could be," said a second. "And I think I know," said a third, not knowing at all. And so it was that the mind-to-mind, eye-to-eye understanding between the people was joined by a spoken exchange, as thoughts created words. Now, when they spoke, the spaces between the words were shorter. Conversation was born, and understanding retreated to a place where it had to be sought and developed and admired when it was found. The people often told each other their thoughts, and soon these became stories. They remembered things now, and there were joyful, gentle stories to tell the children, so the next generation would know about the past. Spending time with new people was interesting, and they began to look forward to it. Looking forward was exciting, and they began to plan their days, to divide time into pieces so they knew when to do things. Now they could look forward and backward both. Life was full. Now that tomorrow had a place, there came a day when an entirely new idea was born. They had always gone swimming in the flower-strewn river. Daily, they would gather great armloads of flower petals that had dropped in the water. These were used for so many things. People wove them together and clothed themselves with them. Sometimes, they would drop a handful of the yellow ones into a dip in a rock where the dew gathered, and when the sun had warmed it through, they would drink. Once, someone even slipped and scraped the skin of their arm. No one had ever seen such a thing before, and there was much talk about what to do. Eventually, someone patted a petal into place over the wound, and it was healed by the next morning. a suggestion was made that to have some of that particular petal nearby would be good, just in case anyone else had a scrape. That tomorrow they should begin to collect them and store them in some long grass. And so it continued. In time, some order was brought to things. People divided their time, and some people gathered the petals, others picked the long grasses, and still others wound the grasses back and forth until a kind of container was made to hold the petals. Lids were needed to keep the petals clean. Different people made these. Many swam out to gather petals, but one day there were almost no petals at all floating in the river. Too many had been gathered, and the people would never use them all. Not before they dried and shriveled, the man said. His voice sounded different than voices usually sounded. Now there aren't enough petals left for warming in the sun to drink. Not for everyone. You're absolutely right, said a woman, thinking how firm his voice was. A decision had to be made. Who would be able to drink and who wouldn't? A meeting was held to decide how to decide. After much discussion, the people divided themselves into groups, and each group did different things. Decisions were made about how many containers of petals would be for tea, and how many for wounds, and how many to cover themselves. This was society, or its beginnings. Some were better at swimming than others. They would swim for the petals, and the swimmers were looked up to. After all, they were the ones who brought back what was needed. It became a kind of shiny thing to be a swimmer, and people began to practice swimming so they would be good enough and chosen. Chosen was a new word, a word that would ring through the ages to come, with many different meanings, in many different times. And the age had changed. Longing had been born, gently and with no urgency, but the edges of satisfaction held a small gap here and there, like a tiny tear in a beautiful fabric. And of course, the people wanted to mend the tear. Well, some did. There were many who never noticed the imperfection, simply moving the fabric to hide the tear from their own eye. A delicate fragility walked side by side with a new power, and soon the small tear had grown a little. Some never noticed, but some, in a kind of sometime haze, remembered a long ago joy. Competition had become popular. This seemed more interesting to them now than just playing in the sun. Time passed, and now there were many more people. Jobs were distributed among them. Some rivers had more flowers than others, and sometimes even the chosen swimmers gathered more than they needed, just in case. Just in case, they said, for the first time. And they repeated it to each other, nodding wisely. This feeling of just in case grew and grew and grew, even though there had been those who objected. The results were still gentle. They were a gentle people. But still, To some, the world seemed less golden and more like it had been burnished somehow, until it had the strong sheen of copper. When the people disagreed about the distribution of flowers or fruit or anything really, they called it a brush. The word had a soft sound, like a bird's wings. These brushes with each other increased. They had to, really, some people said. It was just to be expected, said others. There were, after all, a lot of people now, and there was much in their world to be divided among them. Walls had been created to make places called inside. Meetings had begun in earnest and organized and ordered, and groups of people had moved inside. Inside was handy because the weather had begun to change along with the time. The people no longer liked being wet. They didn't want to damage the clothes whose colors they had chosen so carefully. Besides, having walls kept the animals out. It was fine before, some said, but really the animals didn't know how to behave within the walls, said others, so they should be kept separate from the people. More walls were built for the animals. There were doors to shut now, and locks to turn. And with the change in the people, the language changed too. They needed new words for the new ideas and the new things that happened. Brushes became encounters, and then disputes, and incidents, and scraps, and conflicts. And finally, committees were created to organize the groups. Everyone wanted to be part of one of these committees. After all, committees would make the decisions that might affect petals and walls and animals and conflicts. Many people objected to the committees, especially if they hadn't been asked to be part of one. But the people that were part of the committees insisted they had to, they said. Look at all the people there are now, and so many different places to live. And each place needed its own supplies. This was only fair, they said, each one of them feeling right and justified. The divisions had gone far beyond words now, and when there were conflicts that couldn't be solved, people found ways to use wood and rocks. And wood and rocks were only the beginning. Now, it was no longer warm all the time. The change in the weather brought a coolness that many people liked. It's different, they said. It brings variety. They liked the word, and soon variety began to have a value just for its own sake. In the new coolness, the tree that had fed them all lost leaves and flowers and fruit from its top. An instinct reawakened in birds who began to fly to places where the trees still bloomed. Their song disappeared for some time now, every year. And when the bottom of the trees became bare, some of the animals turned on each other in hunger. But still, amidst all of this, some half remembered. They dreamed of when people had lived by the river so long ago. How wonderful those people had been, and how perfect the world had been before the walls. The dreams became drawings and paintings and things made of rock and marble. The people that created these put flowers and fruit in front of them, just for honor's sake. And soon others followed their example as they tried to recall what the world had been like in that time before. Before, they said to each other, their eyes bewildered. Time passed, and things became more. There was just more of everything. And they did what they did with gusto and certainty. Even those who built the statues and painted the paintings and spoke of what they remembered, they were certain as well. It was just in a different way. All this certainty floating around and maneuvering life gave rise to factions. Now, some people had a lot, and some people had only a little. Walls had become borders. Groups and committees had become countries. Universal laws began to be broken, and purity decreased as power weakened in the people. Now, anger and ego had become part of life, and many began to search for what they missed, what they almost remembered. Sorrow was now a familiar word. One day, a man arrived from another area and began to speak in a new way. He spoke of the joy they almost remembered. He spoke of the mistakes people were making that were changing the world. He spoke of a place of glory and peace and began to tell them how they could get there. He seemed to offer a way out of the sorrow. People started to follow him. They followed his words and his directions and his explanations. Soon there were many people who all believed the same things. They called themselves chosen. In the times that came after, other men would come, as special as the first one. Prophets was the word people said. And they came each in their own time, bringing with them messages and rules to live by. They talked of love and law and ways to bring peace back. These ways were called religions, and they became part of life. People were willing to die to defend them. Each religion had its own branch on the tree of time, the tree of humanity. Each religion began with power and purity, but each became weaker as time passed. And though people followed what the prophets told them and looked for answers in what they taught, nothing stopped the world slipping from that age that still held the gleam and warmth of copper into an age as dense and cold as iron. Dying, abruptly, had become part of life now. People had come very far from the days by the river. They cared about position and power and influence. And when they didn't like being told what to do, and when they thought they were losing influence, all the people who believed one thing gathered together, and they attacked the people who believed something different. The search that had begun in Copper Age continued as human beings left from their homelands to look for new places, for other peoples, and other nations to conquer, in the belief that to own more, to be bigger and stronger, would give them security. As time continued, things became more chaotic and more organized all at the same time. Trying to control the chaos, organization became restrictive and coercive, and equality had disappeared. In families, in groups, in countries, there were struggles for power and control over others. Now, children in schools sat in rows and were taught to color between the lines of pictures someone else had drawn. And people in houses, built in rows, were taught to live between the lines of rules that someone else had drawn. There were lines and cues and formations, and there were rows to sit in. Somehow, we had lost the power to choose wisely. It had slipped away as the energy of the world and the people in it began to run down. People felt incomplete now and tried to find what they lacked in relationships with others, expecting others to have answers they didn't have themselves. This left people often disappointed, or worse, disillusioned. And there was loneliness. People felt, almost all, that no one really knew them or understood them. And the greatest loneliness of all, that we didn't even know ourselves anymore. The world had changed almost beyond recognition. Some of it ached with poverty. Some was dark with violence. Sometimes there were rumbling sounds from the earth itself, as though it were uneasy. Now, parts of the world were filled with glitter and plenty and the excesses of science, and parts of the world were hungry and empty and had nothing. Hearts heavy with sorrow and empty with loneliness found it difficult to dance. We reached out to each other for happiness, but somehow things slipped and changed. We held on too tightly, or not tightly enough. We often saw what we wanted to see, what we expected to see, what we needed to see. People hardly ever saw each other truly. No one felt safe anymore. Even in their own families, doors were locked and windows shut. Humanity's fear reached its ultimate when weapons were invented that could wipe out whole nations of people at once. By this time, we had discovered and invented and explored and gone far beyond splitting the atom and claiming the moon. Through science, ways were discovered to control life itself. And yet, we had set in motion a destruction of our Earth we really didn't know how to stop. In the name of progress, great parts of the Earth had been stripped bare. New deserts were created where no one could live. Many species deprived of their homes had disappeared from the face of the earth, and there were many kinds of animals that were never even seen by the children of this time. But there were wonders, things that quickly became ordinary and expected. Many things could be done by the push of a button or the tap of a finger. It was a time when music was possible without musicians, conversation without people, learning without teachers. Small things held in the palm and sitting on desks and plugged into ears made up a life full of many things. But there was no button to push for peace, and no tap of the finger could make people happy. Everything came and went like a blink. It was called the quickening, a time when science and technology went at a frightening pace, and no one could quite keep up. Even ideas and philosophies changed with the wind as quickly as they were conceived. Moral values wobbled from opinion to opinion. Now, things were old almost before they were new. Many events had been foretold, and many dates given for a time when the world would fall, implode or explode or just die. People saved food and stored water, only to eat the food and drink the water when the dates passed without event. But the predictions hung there in the air, not able to be totally ignored. Not liking the world the way it was, people had begun to gather in groups with names. They called them paths, though the only place they led was within. Many bought books and practiced alone or in groups. They followed the words of wise ones and prophets, new and old. Other people thought this was a waste of time. Don't bother, they said, just don't. Things will continue just the same, they said, sure that the others were foolish and gullible. There were many who told them not to bother, and then turned their heads away. Don't, they said. Still, some of them disciplined their lives. They bent their thoughts to changing the unchangeable, convinced in hope that it would make a difference. Do it, they said, try it. And when asked if they really believed this kind of thing could work, they always answered firmly, I do. They stood in silence, they sat and chanted. They contorted their limbs and exercised their minds. They joined others in larger groups and timed the energy from one side of the world to the other to gain more power from joining each other. They worked for the good and for the peaceful, for the underdog and the overlord alike, for the children and the women and the animals. It all made light in the world, but the darkness had come to its time. and some knew what was to come. They'd been told. We'd been told. And we believed it most of the time. But no matter how much we knew about it, no matter how much we talked about it, and even now, no matter how much we talk about it, it cannot seem real, does not seem real while we're alive and in this world. And yet, we prepare ourselves in between. In between living life, we prepare to leave it. At least to leave the one we know now. The rest, we take on faith. But isn't that what this is? What this always is? Faith. How can it be anything else? Then do and don't, won't and will met head on, and both fell down. One fell first and considered himself a victim. Fathers fell down with their children, men with women. Factions and groups and parties and countries fell down. Humanity fell down. And seemingly there was no way to stand again, though many tried. In the lifting each other, many more fell. And there was no one strong enough to stand steady. Some who felt the fall coming moved away into caves and monasteries, into bunkers and safe rooms, into trenches and tunnels and underground shelters with their families. Welcome had been erased from the mat, and soon the one-time guests and close friends and good old pals who had waited outside the closed doors of safety were erased too. Soon, none were left standing, not in the whole world. Though many had a shine and were examples, still, they fell. The world fell. And when they saw, when the rumbling from the earth began, when they knew what was to come, what was finally to come, the people stopped, frozen by astonishment and paralyzed by final understanding. They stood in every place on earth, without movement, without, at last, anything. And a great silence fell on the world. But one small cry broke the hold, and fear slapped the people, and they ran with a great cry, like ants from boiling water. Fear slapped the animals, and bellowing and squeaking, roaring and screeching, they crowded into each other in terrified masses, chasing their own tails and nipping at their own feet, not able to tell theirs from another's. But they understood, before the human world understood. Maybe they always had. And the animals fell quiet. They huddled close, lovingly. They licked each other and nuzzled and crooned, free from the fear of not enough water, not enough food, not enough room, free from the fear of being tamed or of being trained, free from the fear of becoming food for each other or for the human beings. And with the sound of a sigh, they became soft, silver specks of energy and flew all together to their silent space in the home of all souls. Birds and fish, tigers and lambs, bears and kittens, all together now. And through the silence left on the earth came a sound never heard before, as the earth opened where it had been closed, and closed where it had been open. People disappeared as though a giant mouth had closed upon them in some ravenous appetite. Water rose in a wall where there had been no water, and the gasp came from so many mouths in so many countries that it was as if the world itself had sucked in its last breath. Where there was no water, the earth filled with dark and strangely colored clouds that had once been buildings, once been slums and galleries, houses and theaters, meeting halls and huts, cottages and apartment buildings, and domes and caves and edifices built high enough to scrape the clouds. Churches and synagogues and ashrams and temples and sanctuaries and monasteries filled with people before they fell. And when they were finally rubble and grit, somehow the bells kept ringing. Gongs and drums and bowls and trumpets and everything that could make sound touched life at this last. Violins and tubas and xylophones and zithers and bass drums and odd stringed instruments from every corner played. They played without music, without keys, and sometimes without notes. Cacophony lived. No dolphins called into the air. No sharks hunted with their cold eyes. And the people, never have such sounds been heard from a human throat. And when it could no longer be borne, the great noise fell, and a silence rose up from the people. Silence filled with awe, as love finally surrounded them all. Some who knew, who expected, who had joined their minds to the ultimate in silence, held their hands out to the others to help, to guide, to comfort. Their eyes held a light impossible to turn away from, and the people saw them clear for the first time, this last time. And angel whispered across the silence. And in front of them was one who went a little ahead, one whose light held a promise almost remembered. He went first, and understanding finally broke the hold of fear, and the people began to travel, knowing at last that they were going home. Home. Dimension of silent power, where consciousness is all, where equilibrium holds force static, where all is stillness. Eternal paradox, where time means something else entirely.
Wow, what a stunning journey. What a stunning journey through time. There's so much in that, isn't there? I really felt myself moving right through each aspect of that cyclic journey, and so beautiful, wasn't it? And so many things coming in through the chat box. Ascension, wisdom, beautiful, thank you. And someone else is saying it's explained very well how time moves with such good music background as well. So lots of thoughts of appreciation coming in through the chat box. And yeah, however you responded to it is exactly how you're meant to respond to it. So something to savor and reflect on as well. But Barbara, huge thanks to you for joining us on Youniverse and sharing turnings with us. So our love and our blessings to you. And
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm wondering if you have any comment you'd like to make as we close out.
Not really. Just it seems like this is a time in the world when it is important to understand that time is cyclic and the end is only the beginning.
It's inspirational, isn't it, when we consider it that way, that that it's about beginnings as much as it's about anything else. Yeah.
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 Yes.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you so much. Thank you for writing Turnings, and thank you for your huge contributions that you've made globally to so many people around the world through your writing and your plays, your stories, your songs. It's our big thanks to us. It's our love and our blessings to you.
Thank you, Gabriel, very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity tonight.
Yeah. I think that I've listened to Turnings many times, and each time there's more things in it. And I'm fairly sure that many of you who've listened to it for the first time would like to listen to it again, because there is so much in it to feel and to consider and to experience. Eternity Inc., our online bookshop, has made Turnings available. You can purchase the CD album of Turnings and receive a free CD album of The Traveller, The 7 Keys of Enlightenment. That's another one of Barbara's works. So if you'd like to dive into it again and really go deeply into this whole idea of eternity and time as cyclic, then I'm sure you'll find it to be just a big treasure. So both albums are by Barbara, and the Turnings is a CD special price of $7.95. And with that, you get a free copy of the Traveller CD. You can browse Eternity Inc. for a full online, because they have a full online range of books on self-empowerment and spirituality, and always at not-for-profit prices. But I encourage you to check out Turnings again and take the opportunity to listen to The Day of the Traveller as well. Now look, if you'd like to subscribe to Open to Your Eyes to the Universe and to receive monthly updates, then please email us at special.events at au.brahmakumaris.org. And finally, I'd like to tell you about our next episode of Open Your Eyes to the Universe. We'll be in conversation with Carmen Warrington, discussing being calm and creative. Carmen's known as the voice of peace and has spoken and recorded many meditation commentaries, as well as inspirational books. So she's joining us next Saturday, the 25th of September, 6 p.m. on Youniverse with Carmen Warrington. So please join us. And until next month, explore your passage through time, through eternity, and connect with that original magnificence that lies there within yourself, the soul, and contribute this to our world. Good night and Om Shanti.